So for the next assignment, you're going to be providing me with a CAD drawing of your sketch design. So we went through the steps to line up the sketch design behind the CAD drawing. Now we're ready to trace over it. And these are the techniques we're going to be using. First of all, I'm going to go into layer control because I want to make a number of different layers for my project. So I do have some that are already here, but I'm going to create some new ones. So I'm going to create one called Deck Lower, and I'm going to make that one fuchsia in color. I'm just going to move my color chart over. Okay, and I'm going to make another one, new layer here, called Deck Upper. Now remember, CAD tends to display, or will display, everything in alphabetical order. So I'm using the word deck so that anything that's relative to the deck, if I use that first word, they'll be grouped nicely together. That will be blue. And then I do have a pergola, so here I'm going to create Deck Pergola. Great. And the pergola, I'm going to pick a slightly different color. Let's go with, I can go with black and the green, but the black will stand out nicely on my screen, so I'm going to leave that. There will be some other information there. We've got deck furniture, so let's put that in here as well. Deck furniture. And the furniture I'll make in the light blue color. And that's fixed furniture, so it's pieces like the kitchen, countertops, and things of that nature. We also have some deck structure. Now there's several different types of deck structure that's going to be here. There's going to be deck columns and beams. We're going to group some of them together, and then others we're going to change and give their individual layers, but this is for deck structure. So most of this will be the OBC requirements for posts and beams. And then for the framing, we're going to do something slightly different. And I'm going to make that layer red so it really stands out. And now I'm ready to trace over. So the first color I'm going to trace is the upper level of the deck. So I'm going to make that one current. And then close this menu down. And once again, I can check up here at the top of the ribbon to make sure that the upper deck is current. So where's my design? Where's my upper deck, my lower deck? My upper deck is actually this section right in here. It has a step down. This has a step down too. So there's two upper decks. So how do we consider that? Well, in this particular case, because I know the actual plan, this is 2 steps down to the lower deck. This is 1 step down to the lower deck. So this is actually a 3-level deck. But for our considerations, the upper deck is going to be where I'm going to focus is on this top part here, just to start you off on your project and then move from there. Now this particular plan has a lot of details here with water features and all that. I'm going to ignore a lot of that. I just want to get you started on the basic information for this. They've also got some unique deck patterns. Now notice how their deck pattern changes direction. There's one direction, there's two. I'm going to focus on the upper part of it where we have the table and the steps down and show you how I'm going to work with it. Now this drawing is very dark, so I want to lighten it up. So how can I do that in CAD? I got to click on the edge of the drawing, and you'll notice this menu comes up. It talks about the PDF that you inserted or the JPEG you inserted. And what's nice in here, I have an option here called Fade. And as I move this Fade option over, it reduces the intensity of the light in the background, so that I don't need it to be that strong because I really want to see the line work I'm working with. So as you fade it out, I'm going to go to about 60. Let's try about 70%. That looks pretty good. I'm going to select that by simply clicking off the work. I just pressed enter and it just repeated the layer property. So I just clicked off the work. And that's the sort of level of intensity I want. I can see the black line of the CAD drawing very clearly. Remember the image in the background that's in here? We had faded it out, but I want to do one other thing in here, and that's going to be locking that layer. So where I have the insert graphic layer, I want to lock it so it doesn't move accidentally. There we go. And now I can draw right over top of it. Now I'm going to switch down to, I got to click off of it, otherwise What it'll do is actually change the layers as I pick them up here. I'm going to go to the upper deck. Now notice they all started with the letter D, so they're all in one area. Great. So this is the upper deck. Where is it in here? I'm going to make that current. Now I'm ready to draw. So this is where we want to switch from an estimated value to an absolute value. So I'm going to click on line. I'm going to switch into polylines afterwards, and I'm going to pick up the edge of the deck. There we go. Now notice how this deck moves to the left. And I've got all these snap settings and it wants to click on this. That's the grid line and so on. But what I want to do is simply move my mouse to get an estimate of the value. Now the number here is 5 1/4 inches. That's a silly number to work with. I want some really easy whole numbers. So I want 6 inches. So I'll type in here. There's several different ways I can do it, depending on whether my F12 is on or not. Let's see. I'm going to type in. Press F12. No. So if I have these angles, all I have to do in here is type in -6, 0 and press enter, and I've got a 6-unit line that goes to the left. Perfect. I'm going to zoom out and zoom down or zoom in. And this point, you'll notice that the dimension I have here is 17 foot, 8 1/2, or 1/6 inch. I have a choice. I can go to something like 18 feet or 17 1/2. I'm going to use 17 1/2. So I'm going to type in at X is first, so 0. Oh, sorry, 0, yep, comma. Made a mistake here. Let me start again. I'm going to zoom out. So I'm going to pick up that line from the endpoint where I was. There we go. And I don't have to use the at symbol. That's why I have F12 on. So here it's simply 0, comma, and this is -17 foot 6 or 17.5 feet. There we go. There's the line I wanted. Now I'm going to go straight across here. So we've got about 9 foot 8, 9 foot 10, 11. Where's 12? 10 feet ends up right here. I like that number. So I'm going to type in here 10 feet, comma 0. And there's my angled line. Now this is kind of odd because it's an angle. I'm not going to get a really nice number shown here. Notice it says 5'2", 5'1". I'm going to leave that for now, and I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to go in the opposite direction. Now to pick up this line, I have a choice. I can pick up the end of the building, or I can pick up the end of the line. I'm looking at how it is more easily defined by the existing structure, because I have to dimension all this. So instead what I'm going to do, rather than pick up the end of the line, I'm going to go right to the end of the building, and I'm going to go across this way. And that's an easier number for me to pick up. And the numbers are somewhere around that 13 foot mark. Okay, so we'll type in 13 feet, comma 0. Good. And now I'm going to go straight down to this point. And what are my numbers like? Well, I've got about 14 seems to be a good number in there, so we're going to type in 0, comma -14 feet. Good. Now, this is what I reserved for putting in my number, only because I don't know where that 45-degree angle line is going to come across. So what I'm going to do is simply draw a horizontal line. So I'm going to type in -10 feet, comma 0. There we go. And this number is what it is. I don't know the length, but I do know I want a line that's at a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to pick up the end of that line, and I'm going to draw a line 45 at a 45-degree angle. So I'll type in a polar value. So I'll type in at 6 feet less than, that's 45. There's my 45-degree angle. And now I'm going to trim those off on one another. And there is my work. Now notice how the step is inset into here. It's not always a good practice. It's a tough CAD or a tough framing situation. However, this is what they've designed, so I'm not going to argue with that. I've got, in this particular case, 2 steps, because this will actually be a single step down. This will be 2 steps down. So this is 2 steps, and they've got it inset into here. So the steps, how thick should they be? A typical width of a step is 10 inches. That's for average sort of stepping. However, that may be a bit small. If we look at boards that we're going to be using here, if I want two 2x5s, sorry, if I want two 2x6s, a 2x6 is 5.5 inches wide, 5.5 and 5.5 is 11 inches. If I want something wider, I'll go with 2x8s. So 7.25, 7.25, that's 14.5 inches. So I have a choice between the width of my steps in order to do this. I'm going to do a very casual step or a common step. So I'll take my 2x6s, which are 5.5 inches wide, and I'll make the two two treads, which will be 11 inches, 5.5 and 5.5. So I'll offset by 11 this line in this direction, and that line in that direction, this line in this direction, this line in that direction. Now, one thing we haven't talked too much about steps is they have what's called a nosing. This tread edge actually leans over this step. So what I've actually done in here is made the stairs wider than what I require because I have that additional spacing that's going to be behind it. So I can actually get away with making these 10 inches as opposed to 11, but 11 seems to be working just fine. So now I'm going to fillet them. So I'll fillet this together with that step, and I'll fillet this together with this step. And I've got to determine how I want to edge this off. It's an ugly sort of detail when we look at things like that. I should get something either vertically or horizontally. And from the perspective of framing this, this becomes a difficult image to frame out. So I'm either going to move perfectly vertically, which I can. This may not be an ideal solution, but it works out to be a very easy solution. And in this particular case, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm just going to draw a nice vertical line. Now, it's snapped to a grid point. So we can't always simply click on a space because I have nearest selected. I'm going to type in here. I need at least probably about 3 feet, 4 feet. So X is 0 and 4 feet. And there's my line. And now I can fillet and trim everything off. Now I don't want to do a crossing here because I'll pick up the grid in the background as well. And that's going to be my staircase. And this is how we work through the drawing. Now notice I've got this pattern, or she's got this pattern, and the pattern is a repeat of the 5.5 inch board. There's a couple different ways that I can actually execute this pattern in order to make it happen. The easiest way I find is to trace over it with a polyline. Now that I have all the corners, I have every single part that I want, I can go through and pick up each of the corners here, and then I'm simply going to offset it 5.5 inches, and that will allow me to neatly and quickly put in the pattern. So here we go, offset 5.5, and I can take that line and offset it inwards. Now I'm going to erase the original polyline just because I don't want lines on top of lines. And it makes for a difficult project when we get to dimensioning and things like that. You don't know which one you're dimensioning, and if one's slightly a different dimension than the other, it may be a bit difficult to work with. These treads, I'm going to leave as solid, but I'm going to note later on that they're two 2x6s so somebody can actually see it. And this is how we trace out our drawing. We do this throughout the entire project. And notice how I rounded numbers off. And the reason being is this. Let's take a look at this. I'm going to turn off my image layer. Where do I have that? I called it graphic something. Insert graphic. I'm going to turn that layer off. There's my deck. Now if I go to dimension, and I'm not in the proper layer to dimension, but I just simply want to do a linear dimension. The numbers that we come up with are really nice. They're easy to work with. They're whole numbers that are easy to calculate. This one will be a bit odd. I know that, and that's okay. I'm just going to continue this dimension, do a continuation of the dimension string. Sorry about that. My graphics card is having a tough time catching up with me. So dimension, continue. Yeah, it wants to go in the opposite direction. So I'll do another linear. That's not a problem. So from there to this point, See how I got that really strange number? That's okay. And then I'm going to try to continue once again. I'm stubborn when it comes to things like this. See, it keeps snapping to some other bizarre location, but what I'm going to do is simply click on where it ended up and move it over. I've got a lot of different programs running right now at the same time. That's why this is happening. So this number here, I may want to live with that and be happy with it, or I can make the adjustment right now. So what I'm going to do in here, I'll notice that I've got in here 7/8 of an inch and 7/8 of an inch. I'm going to improve this by 1/8 of an inch, so I got a nice even number. So I'm going to select the stretch command. Remember, we used this last semester, and it's an extremely powerful command. Hopefully it'll let me do this because it is so powerful. It takes up a lot of memory. Select stretch, and I'm going to go across here. Now, see how it's picking up the grid? Okay, I don't need that grid anymore. So why don't I do this? I'm going to go into that grid layer, design grid, turn it off. I needed it more for my sketch than I do for this. I can refer to the sketch design now. I don't need that grid. So let's stretch this, and I'm going to move it over by 1/8 of an inch, see what numbers come up with. So in here, I'm going to type in, it's in the X direction to the right, so 0.125, 0. And there it's 6'3". I'm still out by about 1/8 of an inch here, that number. So I'm going to do a couple things. See, if I stretch it at this corner, I'm no longer at a 45. That's my problem. I don't want to stretch that corner. This number is really an obscure number because it doesn't matter. It's a more of a angular number that when the construction workers are actually putting this deck together, that they really need to referred to, as opposed to this 7 7/8 inch. So, or 2 foot 8 7/8 inch. So I may be happy with this, or I may stretch the whole thing out another 1/8 of an inch, which would give me an odd number here, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. What we're trying to do is come up with some decent numbers. Quite frankly, if somebody looks at this, they're never going to build to 1/8 of an inch. They'll round that off to 18 feet, so might as well do that now. Modify stretch, and I'm going to add 1/8 of an inch here, so 0.125, 0. And now I've got the 1/8 of an inch here, and I've got 19 feet. They're going to adjust that on site. Those are good dimensions to work with. If I bring back my deck image below, you can see I haven't really altered the numbers that were already there as part of the design, but this gives me an opportunity to clean up some of the angles, some of the drawing images, some of the elements throughout the project, and that's kind of the idea. So the level that I've dimensioned this to, as well as the level that I've drawn this to, is really what I need for the final project, for the next project. So it will indicate to me, or you will indicate to me, this level of detail. The other thing that's still missing here is the actual wood pattern. And there's a couple of ways that you can indicate this. You can simply draw a line through part of this image. It doesn't matter where that line is. And I'll change the color of it, or I'm going to actually remove that line afterwards. And then draw a single line from the corner to the edge of that angled line. And all these are offset by 5.5. That's the size of our boards. Now again, this is symbolic because these images, the boards themselves will actually have a gap between them. So we can do it this way if that's what we're comfortable doing, and then simply trim that off. So I'm going to indicate that just so you can see what the final result is. And this tells me the direction of the boards in each significant area. This is important because when we go to framing this particular project, and that's going to be happening in the next assignment, there we go, I need to know the direction of the boards. So that's all you need to do. And when I've done this, if I remove the background image, you can see clearly where the deck direction is going. And you do that in each of the different sections where you have variables. So this one had a border treatment, not necessarily a step treatment, but a border treatment to designate an area, and therefore the decking went in one direction. Now, because they change the actual direction of the boards, it's actually going to change the direction of the framing. I got to be able to support the framing in one direction for the boards in that one, and in another direction for the boards in this one. So it's very critical that I understand where the different board directions are. So when we get to framing it, we can complete this project knowing exactly how the substructure is going to look.